The dinner plate shattered against the wall. Fragments of porcelain scattered across the Thompson family's kitchen floor like broken promises. 16-year-old Marcus Thompson stood frozen, his confession still hanging in the air like smoke from a house fire. "I'm gay, Dad." 3 words that would change everything. Richard Thompson's face turned crimson, his knuckles white against the dining table. The silence stretched between father and son, thick with years of unspoken expectations crumbling in real time. Sarah Thompson sat motionless, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, watching her family implode. "You've destroyed this family's name." Richard's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. 20 years I've built my reputation in this town. 20 years. And you throw it away with this disgusting confession. Marcus felt his world tilting. This wasn't how he'd imagined it. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times in his bedroom mirror, believing somehow that honesty would bridge the gap between them. Instead, it had blown that bridge to pieces. "Dad, please, I didn't choose this. I'm just trying to be honest about who I am." "Honest?" Richard slammed his fist against the table, making the remaining dishes jump. "You call this honesty? It's a disgrace. No son of mine would ever." "Richard, maybe we should talk about this calmly." Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke. "There's nothing to discuss." Richard's eyes bore into Marcus with a hatred the boy had never seen before. "He's not my son anymore." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His legs gave way, and he sank into his chair, watching his father become a stranger. The man who had taught him to ride a bike, who had cheered at his soccer games, who had helped him with homework, was looking at him like he was something diseased. "Pack your things." Richard's voice was ice cold now. "You're not staying under my roof another night." "Richard, he's our child," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He stopped being our child the moment he chose this lifestyle." Marcus stumbled to his feet, his vision blurred by tears he refused to let fall. In his room, he grabbed the first things he could find, shoving them into his school backpack. His hands shook as he reached for his grandfather's vintage denim jacket, the one Tank Thompson had worn during his service years. The worn leather patches and faded fabric suddenly felt like the armor. When he returned to the living room, Richard was holding the front door open, his face a mask of disgust. "Don't come back," he said simply. "And don't use our name. You're nothing to us now." The autumn air hit Marcus like a slap. Behind him, the door slammed with such finality that it seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. He stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the house that had been his sanctuary for 16 years, now transformed into a fortress, keeping him out. Springfield, Ohio had never felt so cold. The first week passed in a blur of park benches and gas station bathrooms. Marcus learned quickly that being homeless at 16 meant being invisible to most adults and a target for others. The few dollars in his wallet disappeared within days, spent on vending machine food and attempts to stay warm in the city's single internet cafe. School became unbearable. Word spread fast in Springfield High's hallways, and Marcus found himself navigating a minefield of whispers, pointed fingers, and barely concealed disgust. Brett Morrison, the quarterback who had once been simply indifferent to Marcus's existence, now made it his personal mission to ensure everyone knew about the freak in their midst. "Hey, Thompson," Brett called out during lunch break, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Heard your daddy kicked you out. Guess even he couldn't stand having a queer for a son." Laughter rippled through the surrounding tables. Marcus kept his head down, focused on the stale sandwich he'd bought with his last $2. Fighting back would only make things worse. At least, that's what he told himself. But late at night, when he was shivering in doorways in abandoned buildings, Marcus found himself reaching into the inner pocket of Tank's jacket. His fingers would trace the worn leather of an old journal he'd discovered there, its pages filled with his grandfather's handwriting. Most entries were mundane, daily observations from Tank's time in the service, but one name appeared repeatedly: Jack Sullivan. "Jack owes me his life," Tank had written in one entry. Pulled him from that burning Humvee in Fallujah. He promised he'd always have my back. Hope he remembers that promise if my family ever needs him. Marcus had never heard of Jack Sullivan. Tank had died 2 years earlier, not in combat as the family had always said, but by his own hand in the garage behind his house. The official story was a heart attack, but Marcus had overheard enough whispered conversations to piece together the truth. Tank Thompson, war hero and beloved grandfather, had lost his battle with demons that followed him home from Iraq, now sitting in the ruins of his own life. Marcus wondered if Tank had felt this same crushing isolation. Had his grandfather also been something his family couldn't accept? The thought was both comforting and terrifying. October's chill deepened as Marcus's situation grew desperate. 3 weeks of sleeping rough had taken their toll. His grades plummeted, his appearance became disheveled, and the constant stress of finding food and shelter consumed every waking moment. The boy who had once dreamed of studying engineering at Ohio State now wondered if he'd live to see his 17th birthday. Everything changed on a Friday night during Springfield's annual Fall Festival. The town square buzzed with families enjoying carnival rides, local vendors, and the kind of wholesome small-town atmosphere that Marcus had once taken for granted. Now he moved through the crowds like a ghost, invisible to the parents who pulled their children closer when they noticed his unwashed clothes and hollow eyes. He was scavenging for discarded food near the dumpsters behind the funnel cake stand when he heard Brett Morrison's voice amplified through a stolen loudspeaker. "Attention, Springfield. Want to know why Marcus Thompson is living like a homeless freak? It's because he's a disgusting gay boy who his own family threw away like garbage." The festival noise died as hundreds of faces turned to locate the source of the humiliation. Marcus felt their stares burning into him, saw parents covering their children's ears, watched teenagers pointing and laughing. The shame was so overwhelming that something inside him finally snapped. For the first time in his life, Marcus Thompson fought back. He launched himself at Brett with all the rage and desperation of 3 weeks on the streets. The larger boy went down hard, his head striking the pavement with a sickening crack. Blood seeped from Brett's scalp as festival-goers screamed and scattered. Within minutes, police sirens wailed through the night air. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus realized his life had just taken another devastating turn. The charges would likely stick. His chances of college, of any normal future, seemed to evaporate in the red and blue lights of the patrol cars. But in the back of the police cruiser, Marcus's fingers found Tank's journal one more time. Jack Sullivan, a name that might be his last hope, if he could find the courage to reach for it. Sometimes the people who seem most different from us become the family we never knew we needed. And sometimes the greatest strength comes not from fitting in, but from finding those who accept us exactly as we are. If Marcus's journey of courage and brotherhood has touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Heart Stories. Hit that notification bell because stories of resilience, acceptance, and unlikely family bonds remind us that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. The Iron Horse Bar sat at the edge of Springfield like a fortress of chrome and leather. Its gravel parking lot gleamed with dozens of Harley-Davidsons, their polished surfaces reflecting the October sunset. Marcus Thompson stood at the edge of that lot, his juvenile court hearing still fresh in his memory, clutching Tank's journal like a lifeline. 3 days of community service and probation had been his sentence. Brett Morrison's family had declined to press serious charges after security footage revealed the quarterback's public humiliation tactics. But the damage was done. Marcus's name was now synonymous with trouble in Springfield's collective consciousness. The bar's heavy wooden door groaned as Marcus pushed it open. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as 24 pairs of eyes turned toward the skinny teenager in the oversized denim jacket. The air hung thick with cigarette smoke, motor oil, and something Marcus couldn't identify but instinctively feared. "You lost, kid?" A gruff voice called from the corner booth. Marcus's throat felt like sandpaper. "I'm looking for Jack Sullivan." A mountain of a man unfolded himself from the bar's shadows. Jack Roadmaster Sullivan stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his graying beard reaching his chest, his leather vest covered in patches that told stories Marcus couldn't read. Scars crisscrossed his forearms like roadmaps of violence, and his blue eyes held the 1,000-yard stare Marcus had seen in Tank's old photographs. Depends who's asking. Jack's voice carried the weight of authority earned through years of commanding respect on dangerous roads. Marcus pulled Tank's journal from his jacket, his hands trembling slightly. Thomas Thompson was my grandfather. Tank Thompson. He wrote about you. The change in Jack's demeanor was immediate and profound. His weathered face softened, and those hard blue eyes suddenly glistened with something that might have been tears. He took the journal with hands that shook almost imperceptibly. Flipping through pages he seemed to recognize. Tank's boy, Jack whispered, more to himself than to Marcus. Jesus Christ, you look just like him at that age. The bar had fallen completely silent now. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, but something had shifted. Jack's recognition seemed to transform him from intruder to something else entirely. Tank never mentioned he had a grandson, Jack said, his voice catching slightly. He died 2 years ago. Marcus replied quietly. Suicide. PTSD from Iraq. Jack's face crumpled for just a moment before hardening again. That stupid, stubborn bastard. He should have called Ayo. He should have. The silence stretched between them, filled with regrets that could never be spoken aloud. Finally, Jack looked up at Marcus with eyes that held decades of pain. Your grandfather saved my life in Fallujah, pulled me from a burning Humvee when everyone else thought I was dead. I promised him I'd always have his back. Jack's voice grew stronger. Looks like I failed him, but I won't fail his blood. The Hells Angels chapter president stood slowly, his movement causing every other member in the bar to straighten to attention. This boy is under my protection, he announced to the room. Anyone got a problem with that? Silence was his answer. What Marcus didn't know was that his arrival had split the chapter down the middle. Half the members saw protecting a gay teenager as betraying everything they stood for. The other half trusted Jack's judgment without question. But Jack Sullivan had made his choice. And in the world of the Hells Angels, the president's word was law. Within an hour, Marcus found himself in the passenger seat of Jack's pickup truck, heading toward the Rainbow Haven shelter on the other side of town. The building was modest, a converted Victorian house with peeling paint and windows that glowed warm against the evening darkness. Sister Mary Catherine answered the door with a smile that could have powered the entire building. She was barely 5 feet tall, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, but her presence filled the doorway like she was twice her actual size. Jack Sullivan, she said warmly, bringing me another lost sheep. This one's special, sister, Jack replied, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. He's Tank Thompson's grandson. Sister Mary Catherine's eyes widened with understanding. She'd worked with enough veterans to recognize the weight that name carried. Well then, you'd better come inside, both of you. The shelter hummed with quiet activity. Teenagers moved through common areas with the careful awareness of those who had learned to navigate dangerous territories. Some looked barely 14. Others appeared older than Marcus, despite claiming to be minors. What they all shared was a wariness in their eyes, the look of young people who had been disappointed by adults too many times to trust easily. In the corner of the main room, hunched over a chemistry textbook, sat Alex Rodriguez. At 17, Alex had been at Rainbow Haven longer than anyone else. Having arrived 2 years earlier when their family discovered their gender transition, Alex's dark hair fell across their face as they studied, but they looked up when Marcus entered, offering a shy smile that made something flutter in Marcus's chest. Alex is our resident scholar, Sister Mary Catherine explained. Full scholarship to Case Western next year, if we can keep them safe until graduation. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to understand what safety meant in this place. Rainbow Haven wasn't just a shelter, it was a fortress protecting society's most vulnerable young people. Kids who had been thrown away for being gay, lesbian, transgender, or simply different in ways their families couldn't accept. Marcus learned their stories during late-night conversations in the common room. Jamie, 15, whose parents had tried to pray the gay away through conversion therapy. David, 16, kicked out for refusing to conform to his father's rigid ideas about masculinity. And Alex, whose quiet strength and fierce intelligence drew Marcus like a magnet to true north. But it was the daily visits from Jack Sullivan that truly began to change Marcus's life. Every evening after work at his auto garage, Jack would arrive with dinner for the shelter residents. Not just food, but stories of brotherhood, loyalty, and what it meant to earn respect through actions rather than words. In the Marines, we had a saying, Jack told Marcus one evening as they worked side by side in the shelter's small garden. Nobody gets left behind. Doesn't matter who they are, where they come from, or what makes them different. When you're family, your family. Marcus found himself working part-time at Sullivan's auto garage, learning to speak the language of engines and transmissions that Tank had tried to teach him years earlier. There was something meditative about the work, the way broken things could be made whole again with patience, skill, and the right tools. But Springfield itself remained hostile territory. Brett Morrison's humiliation had only intensified his campaign against Marcus. The quarterback had rallied a core group of followers who made Marcus's school days a constant gauntlet of slurs, threats, and accidental collisions in hallways. The breaking point came on a gray November afternoon when Marcus found Alex cornered behind the gymnasium by three older boys from Springfield High. Alex's lip was split, their textbooks scattered in the mud, and fear clouded their usually bright eyes. Something primal roared to life in Marcus's chest. Without thinking, he launched himself at the nearest attacker, his fists connecting with a satisfying crack. The fight was brief but brutal, ending only when a teacher's whistle pierced the autumn air. That night, as Sister Mary Catherine tended to both teenagers' wounds, she looked at Marcus with something approaching pride. "You're becoming who you're supposed to be," she said quietly. "Not the victim, not the scared boy who walked through our doors, someone who protects others." Jack arrived an hour later, having heard about the fight through Springfield's efficient gossip network. Instead of anger, his weathered face showed approval. "Tank would be proud," was all he said. But those 4 words carried the weight of absolution. As winter approached, Marcus began to understand that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It requires witnessing, support, and the courage to believe that tomorrow might be different from today. In the unlikely sanctuary of bikers and shelter kids, he was learning to rebuild not just his life, but his faith in the possibility of family. True strength isn't found in hiding who we are, but in surrounding ourselves with people who see our authentic selves and choose to stay. Sometimes the most unexpected guardians become our greatest teachers in courage. The accusation came on a Monday morning that would split Springfield down the middle. Brett Morrison sat in the police station's sterile interview room, his left eye swollen purple from their recent fight, spinning a story that would destroy everything Marcus had begun to rebuild. "He cornered me after the basketball game." Brett's voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "Said if I didn't stop bothering him, he'd make me pay. Then he touched me, tried to force himself on me behind the locker rooms." Detective Walsh leaned forward, his weathered face skeptical but duty-bound to investigate. Springfield had never dealt with accusations this explosive, this divisive. Within hours, the story had spread through the town's social networks like wildfire, each retelling adding new embellishments, new horrors. Marcus learned about the charges when FBI agents appeared at Rainbow Haven Shelter that same afternoon. Agent Sarah Chen and Agent Mike Rodriguez weren't there for him specifically, but their investigation into the Hells Angels chapter had taken on new urgency with Marcus's connection to the organization. "We understand you've been staying here," Agent Chen said, her voice professionally neutral as she surveyed the shelter's modest common room, "and that you've developed relationships with known members of an outlaw motorcycle gang." Sister Mary Catherine stepped protectively in front of Marcus, her small frame radiating defiance. "The Hells Angels have been nothing but supportive of our mission here. They've donated time, money, tools, and protection to these vulnerable young people." "Protection from what?" Agent Rodriguez asked, making notes in a leather portfolio. From people like Brett Morrison and his family, Alex Rodriguez interjected from the doorway, their voice sharp with anger they rarely displayed. From a town that would rather these kids disappear than acknowledge they exist. The agents exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their preconceptions. To them, the Hells Angels represented organized crime, drug trafficking, and violence. The idea that they might genuinely protect homeless LGBT youth didn't fit their investigative narrative. Meanwhile, across town at the Iron Horse Bar, Jack Sullivan was facing his own crisis of leadership. The chapter had split into two clear factions, and the tension was becoming impossible to ignore. "This kid is bringing too much heat," growled Tommy Diesel Martinez, a 15-year member whose loyalty to the club ran deeper than blood. "FBI's crawling all over us because of some gay teenager. We never should have gotten involved." Jake Prophet Williams nodded his agreement. "Tank Thompsons have been dead 2 years. Whatever debt you think we owe him, it ain't worth destroying what we built here." But Big Jim Morrison, no relation to Brett despite the shared surname, stood firmly behind Jack's decision. At 62, Big Jim had seen enough discrimination in his lifetime to recognize it in all its forms. "We swore an oath to protect each other's families." Big Jim's voice carried the authority of decades on the road. "That boy is Tank's blood. Tank died feeling like nobody gave a damn about him. We gonna make the same mistake twice." The argument escalated until Jack slammed his fist on the bar, commanding silence with the force of his authority. But everyone in the room could feel the fractures spreading through their brotherhood. The pressure was taking its toll on Jack in ways that went beyond club politics. That night, alone in his small apartment above the garage, he reached for the bottle of bourbon he'd kept untouched for 3 years. The amber liquid burned away the taste of failure, of promises broken to a dead friend, of a teenager who needed protection Jack wasn't sure he could provide. By morning, the bottle was empty, and Jack's hands shook as he tried to work on the motorcycles that usually brought him peace. The familiar rhythm of repair work felt foreign, like his connection to the mechanical world had been severed along with his sobriety. Across town, the Thompson family was experiencing their own form of disintegration. Sarah Thompson had spent the past month secretly attending PE-flag meetings in nearby Columbus, driving an hour each way to learn about her son's experience without Richard's knowledge. The meetings had opened her eyes to realities she'd never considered. She heard stories from other parents who had lost children to suicide, overdose, and violence after rejecting them for being LGBT. She learned that her religious community's interpretation of Scripture wasn't the only one, that love and acceptance could coexist with faith. But the accusations against Marcus forced her into an impossible position. Richard demanded she publicly support Brett Morrison's claims, to stand with their community against what he called deviant behavior. "That boy has poisoned this whole town." Richard raged over dinner, his face flushed with righteous anger. "First he corrupts our son with his lifestyle. Now he's assaulting decent kids. We should have called the police the night we threw him out." Sarah's stomach churned as she listened to her husband transform their son into a monster. Every instinct screamed that Marcus was incapable of the violence Brett described, but speaking up would mean admitting her secret meetings, her growing understanding that they might have been catastrophically wrong. The breaking point came when Alex Rodriguez was hospitalized after a brutal attack outside Springfield High. 3 older students had cornered them in the parking lot, their assault leaving Alex with a concussion, broken ribs, and injuries that would require weeks of recovery. Marcus blamed himself completely. If he hadn't fought back against Brett, if he hadn't drawn attention to the shelter and its residents, Alex would still be safe. The guilt consumed him like acid, eating away at the confidence he'd slowly rebuilt over the past months. "This is my fault," he whispered to Sister Mary Catherine as they sat in the hospital waiting room. "Everyone I care about gets hurt because of who I am." Sister Mary Catherine's response was swift and fierce. "Those boys didn't attack Alex because of you. They attacked Alex because they're afraid of anything different, anything that challenges their narrow view of the world. Evil doesn't need an excuse, Marcus. It just needs good people to stay silent. But her words couldn't ease the weight crushing Marcus's chest. When Rainbow Haven Shelter lost its major funding source the following week, citing concerns about controversial associations, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He was going to leave Springfield. The plan was simple: take a Greyhound bus to Columbus, disappear into the anonymity of a bigger city, and remove himself as the lightning rod drawing violence to everyone he cared about. He'd saved enough money from working at Jack's garage to survive for a few weeks, long enough to find work and start over somewhere. Nobody knew his story. What Marcus didn't realize was that his decision would force everyone around him to confront their own choices about courage, loyalty, and what they were willing to sacrifice for love. The most profound acts of bravery often happen not in grand gestures, but in the quiet decision to stay and fight for those we love, even when leaving would be easier. Sometimes protecting others means accepting that we are worth protecting too. The attack came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday that would forever divide Springfield's history into before and after. Marcus was working late in Rainbow Haven's kitchen, preparing breakfast for the younger residents, when the first brick shattered the front window. Glass exploded inward like crystalline rain, followed immediately by shouts from outside and the acrid smell of gasoline. Through the broken window, Marcus could see the silhouettes of at least a dozen figures moving with military precision across the shelter's small front yard. "Get everyone to the basement." Sister Mary Catherine's voice cut through the chaos as she emerged from her office, her phone already pressed to her ear. "Now, Marcus, move." But Marcus was already running toward the stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs as he pounded on bedroom doors. "Everyone up! Basement! Right now!" The practiced evacuation drill they had hoped never to use was happening in real time. 14 teenagers stumbled from their rooms in various states of dress and terror. Jamie, the 15-year-old from conversion therapy, clutched a stuffed animal to his chest. David carried his younger roommate on his back, the 12-year-old too frightened to walk. Alex wasn't there. Alex was still in the hospital. And Marcus felt a fierce gratitude mixed with his terror. The basement was cramped and cold, designed more for storage than hiding. Sister Mary Catherine herded everyone into the far corner as more windows shattered above them. The sound of footsteps crossed the floor overhead, accompanied by crashes as furniture was overturned. "Burn it down!" a voice shouted from somewhere in the building. "Burn out the freaks!" Marcus recognized that voice. It belonged to Dale Morrison, Brett's older brother. Recently returned from his second tour in Afghanistan with rage he couldn't seem to direct anywhere but at people weaker than himself. Smoke began filtering down through the floorboards. Real smoke, not just threats. Marcus could hear the crackling of flames beginning to consume the common room they'd spent months making into a home. "I have to get them out," Marcus whispered to Sister Mary Catherine, his eyes fixed on the basement's narrow windows that led to the backyard. "We wait for the fire department," she replied firmly, but her voice carried doubt. Springfield's volunteer fire department was notorious for slow response times, especially to calls involving the shelter. The smoke grew thicker. 2 of the younger kids began coughing uncontrollably. Marcus made his decision. The basement window was smaller than it looked from inside, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. Marcus went first, hauling himself up and out into the cold December air, then reaching back to pull the others to safety. One by one, 14 teenagers escaped through that narrow portal as flames consumed the building above them. Sister Mary Catherine came last, her gray hair singed and her hands cut from broken glass. As they huddled in the backyard, watching months of careful work disappear in orange flames, Marcus heard the rumble of engines approaching from the distance. The sound grew louder, multiplying, until it seemed to shake the earth beneath their feet. 60-plus Harley-Davidson motorcycles roared around the corner in formation, their headlights cutting through the smoke-filled night like cavalry arriving at a desperate battle. Jack Sullivan led the charge, his massive frame silhouetted against the flames as he dismounted and surveyed the destruction. Behind him came every member of the Hells Angels chapter, along with riders from Columbus, Toledo, and Cleveland who had answered his emergency call. "You hurt," Jack's first words were directed at Marcus, his hands checking for injuries with surprising gentleness. "The kids are okay, about." "Dan," Marcus replied, gesturing toward the group of teenagers huddled around Sister Mary Catherine. "But everything else?" Jack's face hardened as he looked at the burning building, then at Dale Morrison and his crew, who were slowly backing away from the overwhelming show of force they hadn't expected. "You boys picked the wrong night for this," Jack's voice carried across the yard with deadly quiet. "And you definitely picked the wrong kids to terrorize." What happened next would become legend in Springfield. Not violence, though everyone expected it. Instead, Jack Sullivan made a phone call that brought every major news outlet in Ohio to their small town within hours. The Hells Angels formed a protective perimeter around the homeless teenagers while cameras rolled, creating images that would challenge every stereotype about both groups. By dawn, the story had gone national. Video of leather-clad bikers gently comforting traumatized LGBT youth while their shelter burned behind them played on every major network. The contrast was so powerful, so unexpected, that it forced viewers to confront their own assumptions about who deserved protection and who provided it. In the hospital where Alex was recovering, the news coverage played on repeat. Their family had arrived from California the day before, prepared to take Alex away from what they saw as a dangerous situation. But watching Hells Angels risk their lives to protect LGBT youth changed something fundamental in their understanding. "Maybe we were wrong about this place," Alex's mother whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched Marcus being interviewed by CNN. "Maybe we were wrong about a lot of things." The investigation that followed moved swiftly. Security cameras from neighboring businesses had captured everything, including Dale Morrison's face as he threw the first brick. FBI agents who had been investigating the Hells Angels suddenly found themselves with a different kind of evidence entirely. The Hells Angels weren't running drugs or weapons through Springfield. They were operating an extensive veteran support network, providing mental health resources, job placement, and emergency assistance to former military personnel throughout Ohio. Their criminal enterprise was actually one of the most effective veteran advocacy programs in the region. But the real revelation came when Marcus was recovering in the emergency room from smoke inhalation. A nurse brought him Tank's journal, which had been found in his jacket pocket, and for the first time, Marcus read the final entries he'd been too afraid to examine. Tank Thompson hadn't just struggled with PTSD, he'd struggled with his identity, with feelings and attractions he couldn't understand or accept in himself. The journal chronicled a man wrestling with demons that went far beyond combat trauma. A veteran who died feeling isolated not just from his family, but from his own authentic self. "Wish I could tell that boy, Marcus, that being different isn't something to be ashamed of," Tank had written in his final entry. "Wish I'd been brave enough to show him that love comes in many forms, and none of them are wrong." Jack Sullivan was sitting beside Marcus's hospital bed when he finished reading. The big man's eyes were red-rimmed. Whether from smoke or tears was impossible to determine. "He was trying to tell me," Jack said quietly. "All those years, Tank was trying to find someone to talk to about who he really was. I was too stupid to see it." "You see it now," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from smoke damage. "That's what matters." Through the hospital room window, they could see the news vans still lined up outside, reporters trying to make sense of a story that defied easy categorization. A gay teenager, a biker gang, a burned shelter, and a community forced to confront its own capacity for both cruelty and compassion. The real test was yet to come. Dale Morrison and his accomplices faced federal hate crime charges. But the deeper question remained, could Springfield choose healing over hatred? Could a small Ohio town find the courage to protect its most vulnerable residents? The answer would depend on ordinary people making extraordinary choices about who deserved their protection and their love. Courage is contagious. When one person stands up for what's right, they give others permission to do the same. In the face of hatred, the most powerful response isn't violence, but the steady determination to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The patching ceremony took place 6 months after the fire, in the rebuilt Rainbow Haven shelter's backyard. Marcus Thompson stood in the center of a circle formed by 60 Hells Angels members, their leather vests gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. At 18, saying he had become the first openly LGBT member in the chapter's history. Jack Sullivan stepped forward, carrying the vest that would change Marcus's life forever. The leather was new, but the patches told stories of brotherhood earned through trial by fire. On the back, embroidered in gold thread, were the words, "Prospect, Springfield Chapter," and below that, "Protected by Tank's Legacy. Tank Thompson saved my life in Iraq." Jack's voice carried across the gathered crowd. Today, his grandson saves all of ours by showing us what real courage looks like. The ceremony was witnessed by an unlikely assembly. Sister Mary Catherine stood beside Alex Rodriguez, whose recovery had brought them back to Springfield stronger than ever. Sarah Thompson watched from the edge of the crowd, her presence a quiet revolution in itself. Even Brett Morrison was there, 6 months of therapy having helped him understand that his hatred had been fear wearing a disguise. The FBI investigation had concluded with unexpected results. The Hells Angels Veteran Support Network was officially recognized as a legitimate nonprofit organization. Their work with homeless youth, PTSD counseling, and community protection had earned them partnerships with the VA hospital and Ohio State University's social work program. But the real transformation had happened within Springfield itself. The national media attention following the shelter attack had forced the town to confront its own values. Churches split between those who chose love and those who clung to judgment. Businesses declared themselves either welcoming or unwelcoming to LGBT residents. The community's soul was being decided one conscience at a time. Marcus had become an unexpected spokesperson for change. High schools across Ohio invited him to speak about bullying, acceptance, and finding family in unexpected places. His presentations always included a photo of Tank Thompson in his military uniform, and the message that healing generational trauma requires honest conversations about who we really are. The garage Marcus opened with Jack's mentorship bore Tank's name above the door. Tank's garage specialized in motorcycle repair, but it also served as an informal counseling center where veterans could work with their hands while talking through their struggles. Alex managed the business while finishing their engineering degree online, their relationship with Marcus having deepened into something both profound and enduring. Brett Morrison's public confession had been the catalyst for his own transformation. His admission that the assault allegations were fabricated came during a town hall meeting where he also revealed his own struggle with sexuality and identity. The courage required for that confession had surprised everyone, including Brett himself. "I spent so much energy hating Marcus for being brave enough to live honestly," Brett said that night, his voice shaking with emotion. "I wish I'd learned from him instead of trying to destroy him." Now Brett worked with Marcus on anti-bullying campaigns, his football hero status lending credibility to messages about acceptance and inclusion. Their unlikely partnership proved that even the deepest wounds could heal when people chose courage over comfort. The changes in the Thompson family had been slower, but no less significant. Richard Thompson's initial resistance had cracked when he witnessed Marcus's interview on national television. Speaking about forgiveness and the possibility of reconciliation, months of individual therapy had helped Richard confront his own fears about masculinity, sexuality, and what it meant to be a father. Sarah Thompson's transformation had been more dramatic. Her work with PFLAG had led to her becoming the organization's regional coordinator, traveling throughout rural Ohio to help other families navigate their own journeys toward acceptance. Her marriage to Richard remained complicated, but their shared commitment to healing their relationship with Marcus provided common ground. The graduation ceremony at Springfield High was Marcus's final act as a teenager in his hometown. As valedictorian, he used his speech to talk about different kinds of education. The formal kind that prepared students for college and careers, and the harder kind that taught empathy, courage, and the revolutionary idea that love was stronger than fear. His full scholarship to Ohio State's social work program was funded partly by academic merit and partly by a grant from the Hells Angels, newly recognized nonprofit. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that an outlaw motorcycle gang was sending a gay teenager to college to become a professional helper. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during Marcus's final week in Springfield, when Jack Sullivan presented him with something unexpected. Tank Thompson's military medals, which had been stored in Jack's garage since the funeral, were now being passed to Marcus along with a letter Tank had written but never sent. "For my grandson Marcus," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to share my truth while I was alive. I pray you find the strength I never had to be exactly who you are, without apology, without shame. Love comes in many forms, and none of them are wrong." As Marcus prepared to leave for college, the rebuilt Rainbow Haven shelter buzzed with activity. Sister Mary Catherine had expanded the program to include educational support, job training, and family reconciliation services. The model they developed in Springfield was being replicated in small towns across the Midwest, proving that change was possible even in the most unlikely places. On his last night in Springfield, Marcus sat in Tank's garage with Alex and Jack, working on a 1967 Harley that would become his college transportation. The rhythm of their work was meditative. 3 generations connected by shared purpose and chosen family. "Tank would be proud," Jack said quietly as they tightened the final bolts. Marcus looked around at the life they'd built from the ashes of rejection and hatred. The garage hummed with purpose. The shelter protected vulnerable youth, and a community had learned that love was stronger than fear. "We all would be," Marcus replied. "Sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family we're meant to have. But when we're brave enough to live authentically, we discover that love has been waiting for us in the most unexpected places, wearing the most unlikely faces." What would you do if you found yourself rejected by those closest to you? How far would you go to protect someone society has forgotten? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales of courage, transformation, and the unbreakable bonds that make us human.